This lesson deals with the skill of budgeting, which is simply a plan for spending money. The steps in creating a budget are simple and small in number. The determining factor in budgeting really comes down to having the discipline to stick to your plan or budget. Before discussing a budget, we want to finally take the time to formally define a term we've been using since very early in our financial literacy journey, and that is a consumer. A consumer, as I believe most of you already know, is anyone who buys products, which is just a fancy word for goods and services. Now, budgeting is going to be one of the more intelligent behaviors of an informed consumer. However, it's not the only one. Generally, now would be the time I ask you to name some behaviors you believe would be used by someone referred to as an intelligent consumer. However, we often hear the use of coupons. And while admittedly, couponing isn't the sexiest of consumer habits, time spent perusing the coupon section of your local business can add up to tremendous savings. Save a quarter here and 50 cents there, you may save $10 on your grocery bill. And while $10 isn't going to make or break you, if you continue such actions for 52 weeks of grocery shopping, those savings of $10 a week for 52 weeks add up to over $500. Not too shabby. Many students also mention looking for sales. If you are patient, you can save significant sums of money by shopping for items at specific times of the year. If you're in the market for a big screen TV, do you know when they go on sale every year? If you said the week leading up to the Super Bowl, you're correct. How about during the month of October? What deals are there to be had? If you said outdoor furniture, then you win a prize. And what is more exciting to an eighth grader than patio furniture? I can't think of a single thing. The bottom line is, if you are patient and can wait, you stand to keep significant sums of your own money in your own pocket. However, if you have to have the hottest gadget now, expect to pay more than if you have the patience and ability to wait. Comparison shopping would be a third example, although it's not always the term eighth graders might use. When recommending comparison shopping, students are usually referring to the idea of shopping around before buying. Rarely is it a good idea, especially with big ticket items, to walk into the first store you see and lay your money on the counter in exchange for whatever product or service it is you seek. Instead, it's usually in the consumer's best interests to do a little research and investigate what businesses are charging for the products you seek. Today, with the internet, this has never been easier. And while it's not a comprehensive list, the final behavior we'll mention is to prepare and, more importantly, use a budget. A budget, while certainly sounding very intimidating, is really a simple concept. And while it's definitely a skill adults need, it's one that you currently could begin to employ, and thus, when you reach adulthood, have that much more firsthand experience, which will only serve you when you reach full membership in the sometimes scary world of grown men and women. A budget is simply a plan for spending money. And like any plan, once formulated, you must constantly evaluate its effectiveness and continue to adjust and adapt to your ever-changing circumstances. The idea behind a budget is that it provides a path to a destination. In this case, that destination is financial health and well-being, which can't be understated when it comes to the overall happiness and well-being you'll seek in adult life. Forming a budget really involves only 3 steps, the first of which is determine your income. This is just a shiny way of describing the money you make for performing your job. When you're older, this will be a lot easier as you'll receive a weekly or bi-monthly paycheck. Now at 13, 14, or 15 years old, this can be challenging. as most of you don't have a regular source of income. However, some of you may receive an allowance, others may be paid to perform certain chores. Many of you receive monetary gifts on your birthday or other special events. So as a 13, 14, or 15-year-old, you would want to account for all these sources of income if you were to attempt to form a budget yourself. After determining what you have coming in, you must also determine the money you have going out. The money you spend in economics is referred to as expenses, and we are going to look at two different kinds. The first expense we'll look at is referred to as a fixed expense, and we will investigate what this means. The other type of expense is known as a variable expense. A fixed expense is one that stays the same from period to period. Every time you go to the mailbox or check your email inbox and find this particular bill, you know what the amount inside is before you tear open the envelope or click on the email. The reason being is it's always the same. Most of you don't have a lot of firsthand experience in the area of bill paying, but I imagine you've heard your parents talking about paying bills and could probably name a few examples of fixed expenses. Oftentimes we hear mention of examples such as mortgage payments, which, in case you are unaware, is the fixed monthly payment the bank expects, usually every month, as you attempt to repay the loan that was probably arranged to buy the house you live in. A car payment would work much the same way. If you don't have all the money up front to buy a car, you may be able to find a lending institution or bank to loan you the purchasing price of the car. However, they will expect to be paid a sum of money every month for a pre-agreed upon number of years before turning over a lump sum of money for you to purchase your car. Cable, satellite, Netflix, etc. are all considered fine examples of fixed expenses, as long as you're not including extra services like renting on-demand movies when using them as examples of fixed expenses. There are certainly many more, but hopefully those we've just discussed provide a little more clarity as to what a fixed expense is, one that is the same every time you receive the bill. The other category of expense is a variable expense. My guess is that while you might not know what a variable expense is, many of you have heard of variables in other contexts. And this knowledge can go a long way towards helping you make an educated guess as to what a variable expense is. Have you heard of a variable in math? Do you remember that it's usually a letter that takes the place of an unknown number, and that the value of the variable can change as the numbers around the variable change? How about in science? Have you heard about a variable there? In science, remember, a variable is what you change in order to gauge the effects of some factor in an experiment. So you might plant 3 seeds. One you keep in total darkness. Another you provide 12 hours of light and 12 hours of darkness. And the third you keep in constant light. Here you are determining the effects of light on plant growth. What are you changing? What's the variable? It's the light, right? So a variable is something that changes. And with a variable expense, it's a bill whose cost changes from period to period. Once again, your lack of bill paying experience can make this a little tricky, but let's look at some examples. Did you know that your electricity bill is based on usage? Do you use all the appliances in your house for the same amount of time every month? Are your lights on and off at exactly the same time every day? If you're like most people, the answer is no. As a result, your electricity bill will vary from month to month. It will not be the same, which means some months you may see your bill spike, while at other times in the year you may see a significant reduction. During the summer months, my electricity bill tends to spike. Can you guess why? That's right, air conditioning. Air conditioners draw a lot of electricity, so during those hot, oppressive summer days, my house uses a lot more electricity, which, at the end of the month, I get to pay for. Another example might be your weekly grocery bill. My guess is that while you buy many of the same products each time you go to the store, you're not buying exactly the same products in the same amounts every week or every 2 weeks, whatever. As a result of the fact that the cost of your groceries change from period to period, your grocery bill is a variable expense. A third and final example would be your natural gas bill. Many of your utilities function as variable expenses. Natural gas is how the majority of you heat your homes in the colder months. So while in the summer months I get a break from big gas bills but have to pay higher costs of electricity, in the winter months I see a near reversal of that accounting. Once again, there are many other valid examples, but I hope the three mentioned here give you a clearer picture of a variable expense and its changing nature. So the third and final step to forming a budget after determining your income and determining your expenses is to compare your income to your expenses. When you do this, what you're hoping to see is that your income is greater than your expenses. If so, you have money left over, which means you have a surplus. However, if when you compare your income to your expenses, you find that your income is less than your expenses, you have to make some tough decisions, and there really are only two sound options available. If your income is less than your expenses, then you have what's known as a deficit. If you wish to resolve this as soon as possible, and there are really only two responsible solutions, and this is true if you are the head of a household attempting to create a family budget, or the United States federal government attempting to guard the financial health of our nation. Option number one is to get more income. Now, this is more easily said than done. This means securing a raise from your employer, which you better have some real persuasive arguments, more so than I want and need more money. Or, more likely, it means working more hours or finding a second job. Now, most people don't want to work one job, never mind two, but this is the situation you leave yourself in if your income is less than your expenses. The only other option at your disposal is to reduce your expenses. Perhaps you can't afford that new car. You gotta sell it. Maybe you can't eat out every weekend or afford the lavish vacations. The bottom line is you have to cut back on what you're spending, which for some folks becomes real tricky when you're deciding between buying groceries or buying medicine you need to live. Sure, the possibility exists of getting a little more income combined with a reduction in expenses, but that's it. Those are the only two reasonable solutions. Which brings me to the fact, and I'm glad it happens, that every year someone says, go to the bank and get a loan, which is great that it's mentioned, but it's a terrible idea, which we're about to see. As I've come to learn, a surprising number of 8th graders don't know that banks are businesses. And like all other businesses, they operate for profit, meaning that when they loan you money, they do so because they stand to financially benefit. When you borrow money from a bank, you sign a contract agreeing to pay back the bank plus a little something extra called interest, which is how the bank makes money. So finding yourself in debt and attempting to go to a bank and secure a loan is the equivalent of finding yourself in a hole and then digging deeper in an attempt to get out of the hole. At that point, you're going the wrong way. So, If you learn you've created spending habits that see you spending more than you actually make, that is a problem. Moments ago, we talked about the two responsible ways to correct overspending, and now we're going to look at the worst case scenario. Understand that there is no need to panic if you run a budget deficit for a month or even a couple of months. The situation becomes problematic when you do this month after month and make no adjustments. Eventually, bills must be paid. Unless you're the US federal government who runs $100 billion deficits year after year. You, however, are not them and can't get away with it like they do. So, if you are an average American bill payer and you have failed to correct your deficit spending, you may find yourself having to utilize the nuclear option, which is bankruptcy. Despite many of the commercials you may see and hear offering the destitute financier the lifeline of bankruptcy, you need to understand what it means, because it's not a decision that should be taken lightly. When you declare bankruptcy, a debtor's assets are sold to settle unpaid debts, and the debtor is no longer responsible for further debt beyond what was recovered. A positive is that whatever debt remains after you declare bankruptcy, you're essentially forgiven. So you've thrown up your hands and legally declared, I need a restart in the game of life. Bankruptcy will, in a sense, wipe your slate clean, but it does come at a cost. The cost is the loss of many pieces of property, mostly luxury items. You do get to keep your home, clothes, and furnishings, a modest automobile, but you do lose all luxury items and possibly financial assets like, say, for example, stocks or other investments. Additionally, and this is what we're going to explore, declaring bankruptcy is similar to detonating a nuclear device on your credit history, which can make life much more challenging. In this world we live in, despite admonishment to never a borrower nor a lender be, pretty much everyone borrows money in their life. Whether that's to buy a house, a car, go to college, the majority of Americans borrow money. And this isn't a bad choice if you're in a position to repay your loans. However, from the first time you borrow money, and for many of you this will occur with the first swipe of your first credit card, you begin to amass a credit history, which is a summary of a person's borrowing and repayment history. This credit history will be used by all lenders to determine whether or not you are a safe risk when it comes to lending you money. Now, oftentimes, this information is met with the response of, well, I'll never use a credit card because I know the dangers. And while there is some truth in that, there are also some problems. First of all, credit cards, like fire, are neither good nor bad. It's all a matter of how you use it. Fire can keep you warm. It can be used to cook food. It can keep animals away from your campsite. However, if you decide to lay down and roll around in it, it can seriously injure you. The same is true of credit cards. I use mine all the time. I never carry cash. A pair of $100 gym shoes, credit card. A $25 pizza, credit card. A $1 pack of gum at the gas station, credit card. Why isn't this a problem? Well, the answer is I keep track of everything that I charge on my credit card, so when the bill arrives at the end of the month, there are no surprises. Additionally, when the bill comes, I pay in full, meaning I never pay any interest. The problems begin when you can't pay your entire bill at the end of the month, because that's when the credit card company gets to charge you a little something extra called interest. Additionally, if you decide, well, I'll never use my credit card, the problem becomes you don't have a credit history, which isn't as bad as having a poor credit history, but it also means as a credit card ghost, you'll have a hard, if not impossible time finding a bank that will loan you money to go to college, buy a car, or take out a home loan. So the answer is you don't avoid using a credit card. Instead, you need to develop the discipline to use it wisely. When you contact a bank inquiring about a loan, and for some of you, this may be in regards to your first car or a college loan, which neither of those two events are too far in your future, one of the first things they'll ask is whether or not they can run a credit check, which will result in them learning your FICO score. If you say no, it's end of conversation, no loan. Your FICO score is essentially a credit worthiness score. It tells the bank what kind of risk you are when it comes to lending you money. After running your score, they will see a number between 300, which is not good, and 850, which I've learned is impossible to receive. Weird scoring system, but that's the system.
I didn't always have such a great credit score. This was us. For a while there, you were pretty bad. No, that 509. I guess it's because I wasn't watching it. Just let it do whatever it wanted. So I went to freecreditreport.com, and with their daily monitoring of my credit report, well, it gave me the confidence I needed to look after my credit score. Who's a good 745? You're a good 745.
Free credit score and report with a moment to triple advantage.
So, what do those numbers mean? Well, if you come back as a 725, this tells the bank that there's a 5% chance of you being more than 90 days late on repayment of your loan during the next 3 years. Or, in other words, there's a 95% chance you'll pay back your loan on time. With very few guarantees in life, a 95% assurity is pretty reassuring to your lender. On the flip side, if they run a credit check and you come back as a 550, this tells the lender there's a 70% chance that you'll be late on repayment at some time during the next 3 years. In other words, there's a 30% chance you'll pay back your loan on time. Now let me ask you this. Would you loan a friend $20 if you knew there was a less than 50% chance they'd pay you back? Right. Now imagine you walk into a bank, a total stranger, and ask to borrow not $20, but rather tens of thousands of dollars. How eager are they to meet your request when their goal, like all other businesses, is to make money? So lastly, we're going to look at how two people with very different FICO scores seeking the exact same type of loan are treated by a bank. So the scenario is you need $10,000 to buy a car, but you don't have $10,000. Now, $10,000 is a significant sum of money, but understand $10,000 is far from the amount of money needed to buy a sparkly new car. A brand new vehicle, and we're not talking about one with all the bells and whistles, will probably run you about $30,000. So understand what you're getting for $10,000. If two people walk into the bank, one with a 725 FICO score and the other with a 550, here's how they'll be treated. When you begin talking about that little something extra the bank will expect you to pay for the privilege of borrowing $10,000, the person with the 725 will be offered somewhere in the neighborhood of a 3% interest rate, while the person with the 550 will be asked to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of 17%. Now, even though most 8th graders usually have a hard time understanding what this means, most know that when you're paying 5 times as much interest as the other guy or gal, it's not good. Dollars seem to make more sense though, so let's look at what those interest rates translate to in terms of dollars. The monthly payment for the 725 is $180 every month for 5 years. That's 60 payments. While the 550 will pay almost $250 a month, which doesn't seem too crazy until we look at the impact 5 years later. In terms of total amount of interest paid, the 725 FICO score will pay almost $800 for the privilege of accessing that $10,000 they otherwise would not have, while the 550 will pay almost $5,000 in interest. Remember, the car, if you could pay in cash, only costs $10,000. So the final cost of the car for the person with the 725 is a little less than $11,000, while the 550 pays almost $15,000 for the same car because they have bad credit. This is usually when people say, wait a second, the person with a bad credit is expected to pay more, but they've indicated they don't handle money well. That's how it works. If you think those terms, 17% interest, are outrageous, then you're free to walk. But that's what you have to agree to if you want access to the bank's money and they know you are a high-risk borrower. This all becomes moot if you have all the money to pay cash for the car. However, there will be times in life, say when you buy a $250,000 house, when this just won't be possible and borrowing becomes necessary. Hence, another reason to budget your money and protect your credit history.